We're excited to get into this one, and we hope that you are too. And if you are, leave a like down below, comment down below as well. Maybe some players we missed, maybe some players we're drafting too late, maybe some players we're drafting too early. Let us know how you're feeling about this incoming rookie draft class and what questions you have about it. And if you want to join us for future mock drafts on Sleeper or dive deeper with us in in-depth discussions with us through Discord, check out patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind. Get in on our Patreon Discord server, as well as all of our bonus podcasts, rankings, etc. And you can even start things off with a 7-day free trial. But with all that said, and all the promo in the books, let's get to the content you came for. At the 101, we see Caleb Williams coming off the board in this Superflex PPR mock draft. Caleb Williams, where he should be, in my opinion, at the 101. We'll have to see what Chris does at the 102. Already mixing up my draft numbers, as you know, it's going to be a good draft when that's the case. And we're doing back-to-back drafts, so stay tuned for the second one. Marvin Harrison at the 1-2. Nothing crazy yet, boys. We're excited. You know, we have somewhat of a long wait until the combine where we can get all excited about dudes running around in shorts and all the athletic testing and stuff. But what are we looking at right now? What are we looking to do as we do mock drafts? You know, what are we looking to get a gauge on here at this point in the draft season? You know, still diving deeper into this class yet. We're not 100% through it. So what are we trying to do while I'm thinking about my pick?
Yeah, I think we can look at the first round in kind of two different ways. Basically, if you're in the first 7 picks, you know, how is that top 7 going to play out for your pick and your team need? And then if you're outside of that top 7 and you're in the back 5, you know, at that point it becomes, who do you really want to target? And then what's your backup plan? Because you don't know what's going to happen in those 5 picks in the back half of the first. So I think you can really split the first round in half this year and kind of change your strategy and how you're looking at it depending on which half you're in.
It's all about value, and this is great. This shows you, you know, hey, do as many mock drafts as you can. Patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind is how you mock with us. Free 7-day trial, in case you're wondering. But this shows you, like, okay, so I'm picking from the 109, right? That's what I selected for this mock. And do I like what's there at the 109? Do I need to trade up or trade back? You could do those things now and be proactive instead of waiting until you're on the clock when pick values are completely different. The pick values are only going to go up. So if you want to move up and get Brock Bowers and you have to go to the 106, it's going to be much harder to do that in April or June when you're drafting, as opposed to right now in February. So that's why I love doing mock drafts. It's all about value. And, you know, hey, this way we could argue online some more about who we like better. That's what's all about.
Exactly. And we can spread all our hate about who isn't good in this class, even though we're just highlighting concerns and why we're in on other players over others. But I think, Mike, you touched on an awesome point. I think right now, when you're talking about moving around the draft board before we get to Nate's pick, I think now is a good time to try to trade up to get up in the board. You know, if you're in that back half and you want to get into the top 7, I think it's a good time to trade up. But I think if you're thinking about trading back, waiting until you're on the board, on the clock, letting that pick get as much value on it as you can, I think that's kind of the move to make with that concept. But Nate, you're on at the 108. You claimed your pick here. What do you got here at the 108?
I'll be honest, I am in between 2 quarterbacks right here. I'm in between Bo Nix and J.J. McCarthy. I'm obviously a big Bo Nix fan, but J.J. McCarthy is rising up boards. I know it's still early in the draft process, but I'm going to go ahead and take J.J. McCarthy here. In Lance Zierlein's most recent mock that he did, he had him going to the Broncos at 14. And it sounds like the NFL is really excited about J.J. McCarthy and what he brings to the table because he played in a pro offense, because he played under Jim Harbaugh. He's got, you know, the ideal football mentality from what it sounds like. He's very locked in. He had this whole meditation routine before every single game. So teams love what they've seen with J.J. McCarthy. You know, he's a little bit younger than Bo Nix. I like both of them. I like Bo Nix a good bit. I like how he processes. But J.J. McCarthy, you know, if he is a top 15 pick, you know, at the 108, I picked this because you get outside of the top 7 tier. But I think the 108 is going to become that next quarterback, that quarterback 4. I think the quarterback 4 is going to be locked into this spot. I don't know if it's J.J. McCarthy or Bo Nix. I think at this point, Michael Penix is starting to lose some steam in that competition. I think he's going to end up being, you know, a little bit later off the board. But whoever that quarterback 4 is, the 108 is going to be a great spot to pick them up.
I was actually pretty torn here. So as it turns out, the 109 you know, you kind of never really know what this pick's going to look like. And I liked what I saw here. I was kind of contemplating between a few guys. Brian Thomas, the guy that I selected, the consolation prize from LSU, if you want to think about it that way. I was also considering Troy Franklin and Jonathan Brooks, who went after me. I like all these guys. I just like Brian Thomas a little bit better. And I do want to say, to Nate's point, I did finish my scout of JJ McCarthy last night. I just have to do my scouting report on him. I was really impressed with what I saw from him overall, and I think I can say enough that from what I saw from JJ McCarthy can firmly put him in my rankings over Michael Penix Jr. and Bo Nix. I could say that with pretty decent conviction too. One thing that I liked about JJ McCarthy, pocket presence. This guy does not falter under pressure, stands in there tall, steps up in the pocket, and that is going to be huge in the NFL.
Catching up on the rest of the first round here, wrapping up the first round. So, Mike, you went Brian Thomas, and we see Jonathan Brooks, as mentioned, Bo Nix, and then Trey Benson. Then at the top of the first, we start off with the McConkey Tonk is alive and well, and somehow, some way, Troy Franklin. And I've seen this a couple times now getting into the second round. And I cannot stand for this. As somebody who is an unapologetic Troy Franklin truther, have been on this guy for a while, I can't stand for this. As much as I like Ladd McConkey, as much as I can respect Trey Benson, as much as I love Jonathan Brooks and Bo Nix, put some respect on this man. Get him back in the first round. Great value pick up there by Chris Fix, one of our most loyal patrons. Shout out to Chris, our one QB guru in the Discord. If you are one QBer watching this draft, there's nobody better to hang out with and talk one QB with than Chris. So,
Bob,
can I ask you a question before we move on? Sorry. Who would you have taken out of the first round to put Troy Franklin in?
That's what I was going to say. There's a lot of people.
Here's the thing. I had strongly considered him with my pick at 109. I just like Brian Thomas a little bit better, which is why I went with Brian Thomas. Who would you take out there?
The easiest one for me is Trey Benson. And that's not even saying he shouldn't be at the top of the second, middle of the second. I'm not saying he should be a late second round pick. I just think with how running backs are and how wide receivers are, Franklin should be ahead of him. That's my only thing. And I think he could go ahead of Bo Nix, but Bo Nix could stay in the first. If he's a first round drafted quarterback, that's where he should be. Jonathan Brooks gets day 2, second round draft capital. I'm still thinking the same thing. And I like the Braylon Allen respect here that's coming up. I want to make my pick before I time out, though, because I will get distracted. You know, Nate, you just dropped your top 25-ish rookies. I know I think it ended up being like a list of 26.
Ended up being 26.
But it is what it is. And Braylon Allen was left off that list, and you know, rightfully so. Got some blowback in the comments. And I'm not here to trash your rankings or anything like that. I just do believe that, in my opinion, he belongs in the top 15, 20-ish at worst. But I see where you're at, because I know you, in general, fade running back. So he's naturally going to be a little lower in your rankings than a lot of people, but still a great player, still very young. And I think, you know, the production that he had in a trash Wisconsin system, and everybody is, I think part of it, getting lost in the shuffle of the class. You know, there's so much going on with wide receivers and running backs in general that it's easy to just kind of get lost. And we haven't seen him in action yet, like we've seen all these senior bowlers. And I think once we see him in action at the combine, going through the drills, I think a lot of people are going to get back in on Braylon Allen quick, because a lot of people right now just think he's this bruiser running back. I don't see that at all. I think he's plenty athletic, and I think he can make the cuts. I think he has great vision, all this. You know, if you want to get into receiving antics, you know, how that's going to play out, I can respect that 100%. But I like the Braylon Allen respect here, and that's not just coming from Wisconsin truther or homer. I'm an Oregon Ducks bandwagoner, all right? Get it right. Maybe somebody new this year. Who knows, though? But catching up, maybe Purdue. It depends on whoever wants to write me a 10-page thesis on what team I should follow. You know, email dynastyrewind@gmail. But catching up real quick. Adonai Mitchell at 2-3, Braylon Allen at 2-4. I went Bucky Irving, one of my favorite running backs in this class as well. Blake Corum at 2-6, Xavier Worthy at 2-7. Nate, you went JT Sanders at the 2-8. Pretty nice value, I think, for the right now tight end 2 in this class, consensus wise.
Yeah, and I think you know, as I continue to, you know, do a lot of research into the NFL draft community and listen to people like Lance Zierlein, Dan Brugler, the guys over at PFF, Ja'Tavion Sanders, you know, I don't know if he's going to be a first-round pick, but he is just locked into that early second in the NFL draft. He's a top 50 player for most scouts pretty easily. They love what he can do, both blocking and in his routes after the catch. He's very athletic, former 5-star recruit coming out of high school. So JT Sanders, his pedigree is really impressive. And I think picking him up at the 208, I haven't gone wide receiver or running back yet. And some of those guys that I've missed out on, I definitely wish I had. But I think positional value in this draft, especially at tight end, because we talked about this tight end class isn't necessarily as deep as last year's. So if I can pick up Jatavion Sanders as we start getting into the later part of the second round, I think that's a really good value, honestly. I get it, though. I understand why he falls. Like the same thing with the first round. There's just a lot of players who are deserving at this point until we get the landing spots and the draft capital to really help out further filtering this. But until then, it's hard to take guys out that are ahead because there's just so much talent in this class.
Mike, you went Jalen Polk at 2.9. Love the player. Talk about him.
Mm-hmm. So this might seem early, but you got to know your league mates. He's not coming back to me at 309. He's not getting past Bob Van. I know that. And Bob has a great point. You know why? Because Jalen Polk has some of the best hands in the class, and this guy could do everything. I thought about Malachi Corley. I thought about Keon Coleman, but all bias aside, I want a guy who I think could be one of the better wide receivers in the class. And to get him at the 209, I'm completely on board there. I think he could be a little bit more than what he was at Washington, just overshadowed by Roman Dunze. And that happens. Doesn't mean that he's not good. It's just he had a really good prospect playing alongside him. They also have Jalen McMillan there as well, but I think he's a guy that'll get drafted a little bit later. And I love what I see after me, too. Nate might be a little disappointed that he can't get the running back that came after. We got Malachi Corley. Then
I made my choice.
What's that?
I said I made my choice. When I picked up JT Sanders, I knew Marshawn Lloyd wasn't coming back to me.
I got to be honest with you, Nate. I love the JT Sanders pick, but after watching Ben Sinnott and grading him out, I have a new tight end 2 in the class, and he played for Kansas State.
Perfect transition, Mike, because I'm going Ben Sinnott at the 3.5 here. Beautiful. I am so sick of missing out on Ben Sinnott in my drafts. I drafted him at the 3.1 in a draft last night, and I think sooner rather than later, with how I know tight ends transition through the draft process, especially the top ones, we'll have Brock Bowers come off the board in the top 7. We know that. Maybe slides to 8 because of wonky things happening. But either way, JT Sanders is going to slide up. Everybody else is going to come up the board. And Ben Sinnott, I think there's actually probably 3 to 4 really good tight ends in this class. I'm in on Dolan Holker. I like Ben Sinnott a lot too, and I like JT Sanders. But Ben Sinnott, with the flexibility in how he can be used and how he's just a dang good receiver. And a lot of guys are going to want to call this guy a fullback because that's what he started out as. And fullbacks don't put up these numbers, even at tight end. Great run after the catch, was one of the top 5 in yards after the catch per reception analytics. One of the top 5 in missed tackles forced as a tight end. This dude can create, he can catch, and he can run routes and get open. And when you're a tight end in the NFL, that's what you need, and I think Ben Sinnott can do all of that. So I think he rises up board. Mike, you said you'd put him in the same tier as JT Sanders. Correct. I don't disagree with that. I think Ben Sinnott is a sleeping giant right now. I don't think that lasts. I think he's locked in day 2 pick because he's, in my opinion, the best tight end blocker in this class. So I think he's a lock for day 2. Once that happens, up the board, especially when you dive into all the stuff you can do as a pure receiver. But let's catch up a little bit on some picks. So after Jalen Polk went with Mike, we see Malachi Corley, Marshawn Lloyd as mentioned, Brendan Rice pop off the board, Keon Coleman at 3.1, which is nuts. I didn't even see that till just now, so that was a raw reaction. I think that's even probably a little low for him. I think that's good value. Obviously, I think mid-second we get in a fine discussion about
that's really good value.
Right. Yeah. And so much upside with that pick. But then we got Audric Estime at 3.2, Michael Penix at 3.3, Devontae Walker falling crazily.
Again, more upside.
True. Pun intended, dropping the ball, dropping in drafts before my Ben Sinnott pick. Go ahead, Nate.
These guys are dropping right now, like Keon and Devontae Walker. After the combine, when we see them both test really, really well, they're going to pop right back up into the second round. They're also going to get second-round draft capital at worst, both of these guys. Mm-hmm. So, we're seeing this drop right now as kind of a reaction to, Devontae Walker off the Senior Bowl. Keon, just to people watching the film and realizing that he's not the highlight machine necessarily that we were seeing there, but they're going to rise up. They're not going to be in the third round, I think, come your actual draft. There's just no way I can really see that happening.
I agree.
I am with you there 110%. So I went Ben Sinnott. Then we see Jermaine Burton, Ray Davis. Nate, you pick up Roman Wilson. I think this is a good spot, good value for him as well. Why don't you touch on him a little bit?
Yeah, I was actually in a crazy turn of events at the 308. I was between like 3 different guys, actually 4, and then Ray Davis went off right in front of me. But I was happy with a couple different players here. Ray Davis, Roman Wilson, who I ended up picking. Xavier Legette was right in my queue as well. I was considering picking him. I think he's extremely talented. And then also the guy who went after him, Ricky Pearsall. Those 4 players in a row, I think, are all very talented, all going to have day 2 draft capital. And Roman Wilson right now, off his Senior Bowl production, not quite Tank Dell-esque, but a little bit. What we've been hearing since the Senior Bowl, I know there's always reactions and overreactions to the Senior Bowl, but we're now a couple weeks out from the Senior Bowl, and Roman Wilson hype is continuing to build as scouts look more into his film, as the Jim Harbaugh connection continues to be a strong advantage for those Michigan players. Teams really like the fact that they worked under Jim for years and that it was a really solid, consistent program. And Roman Wilson, he blocks like crazy. He knows how to run his routes. He's very athletic, former track background, has a confirmed 4.3 from high school. If he goes out there and tests at the combine really well on top of the Senior Bowl production, I think we're seeing Roman Wilson in the first half of the second round in the NFL draft, which means if you're picking up anywhere in the third, you're getting a steal.
Xavier Legette in the 3-9 slot. Talk about him.
I like Legette at the 3-9. I know a lot of people are concerned. You're like, what happened? 5 years to break out in college. But when I looked at his 2023 film, I see a guy who has a great change of direction, pretty solid hands, good burst after the catch. I believe he had over 1,100 yards this last year. Playing with the guy who went at the 312, Spencer Rattler, which I love that pick, by the way. And I think at the 309, we're looking at guys who most likely aren't going to be starters on your team year 1. These are guys that you're stashing most likely on your taxi squad or deeper parts of your bench. I'm willing to let Legette chill on the bench for a little bit. Completely fine with that 100%. So I love the value at the 3-9. Could be getting some nice upside there.
We did see Ricky Pearsall show well at the Senior Bowl, as well as Jacob Cowing, at least in my opinion, before he got hurt. I'm going to make my pick before I time out. Spencer Rattler, I do like that pick as well. I think he's somebody that, has lost a lot of steam from once he was at one point a top recruit coming out of college, if not the top recruit or the number 1 quarterback recruit. I don't remember which, Nate. Maybe you can refresh my memory. But had a winding road, obviously, to the NFL, got usurped by Caleb Williams at one point at Oklahoma, kind of got ran out of town at that point as well. Then we see Will Shipley, Jamari Thrash, Cade Stover, Jalen McMillan. I went Malik Washington, who actually I've been sleeping on a little bit. I've been torn up with Taj Washington that much more. And, Malik Washington actually has some really impressive analytics when you look at yards per route run, targets per route run, all of the things, and really stacked up well in terms of overall statistics this year. Smaller frame, smaller body, but a lot of quick twitch ability and all of that we love to see out of those smaller route runners. Zioniah Smith, Michael Pratt. Now, Nate, we're with you at the 408.
Yeah, 408, and I'm looking to get a running back here, finish out, so I have one of every position. And I think there's not a ton of running backs I love at this spot, but you can't really go wrong picking up an Alabama running back in the 4th round.
Ooh.
So Jason McClellan, I'm going to pick him up. I think he's a day 3 running back. He checks a lot of boxes. He might not have the elite upside of some of these other guys. Obviously in the Alabama backfield, he hasn't had the production like as the RB1 there that some of these other guys in this draft class have had. But like I said, you can't really go wrong picking up an Alabama running back in the 4th round. Those guys always seem to stick around and be good pros. At worst, this is a guy that I can just keep at the bottom of my running back roster and hope that got some nice spot starts out of him.
Mike, you were telling Nate not to do it in the private chat.
He's
I want to know who you were.
He's my non-consensual Dylan Johnson. It is happening. I'm making this a thing. Put it on a T-shirt. You want the next Brian Robinson. This is the guy that I think could project as such. Big, physical, decent hands, does everything he's asked to. Oh, and he plays through injury. That's right. Non-consensual Dylan Johnson. Making it a thing.
Yeah. Imagine looking at all of the running back landscape there is and being like, man, I wish there was another Brian Robinson out there.
Well, that's how bad the
running back
is right now. It's just we just need a guy who's a steady contributor both in the NFL and on your fantasy teams. Hey, Dylan Lube, off the board.
I think Dolan Holker should have made his way off the board as well to wrap this one up. But stick around. We're going to dive right into another mock draft before we get into any in-depth analysis. We'll be right back. So we're bouncing into the second mock. I'm at the 101 in the Superflex PPR mock draft. I'm taking what's chalk, in my opinion, in his own tier alone, Caleb Williams. I'm taking the upside, the generational prospect, quote unquote, if you want to say that, at the quarterback position. I see a ton of upside. I see a ton of ability to play the role of quarterback. I can't not take Caleb Williams. Even if I'm set at quarterback, I'm going Caleb Williams or I'm trading the pick. I'm not going to sit on the pick and not take what I believe to be the supreme value. And the thing about being set up at quarterback or feeling like you're set up at quarterback, look at the past 2 years and tell me you feel confident about having 3 starting quarterbacks in your roster through an entire season. You can't. There's been so many injuries. I'm starting to feel like I want 4 starting quarterbacks that are locked in because 2 of them are going to go down. I need to fill bye weeks and all that, and injuries, obviously. Yep. So I'm taking a quarterback here at the top no matter what. Marvin Harrison, 102. Love that. Nate, you want Drake May at 1-3. Talk about it.
I'm taking quarterback too for the same reason as you. The value is just at that position so necessary, especially in Superflex. The only team that I have across all my teams where I feel really good about my quarterback room is where I have Lamar, Dak, and CJ Stroud all together on the same team. Everywhere else, if you don't have 3 of those guys, then the third one or fourth one, you might be in trouble. So Drake May, I think what he brings to the table just as a prospect is right up there. The top 3 quarterbacks are so talented. You can kind of pick your poison depending on what you want. But I think Drake May, at the end of the day, he brings a really good floor, but he also has that rushing upside that, people are so excited about with Jaden Daniels. I'm excited about the movement ability of Caleb Williams. Drake May has just as much rushing ability, pocket mobility, pocket presence. Like, he brings to the table just as much athleticism as any of these other guys when you're on the field. So I think Drake May, he's gotten some anti-hype recently, as Jaden Daniels has actually passed him in some mock drafts and some rankings, but I'm still a big fan of Drake May. I'm happy to pick him up here at the 103.
Mike, you're up at the 107.
I sure am.
I don't think this pick is too difficult.
I like the 107 better than the 109 in the last draft.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
That's what Mike does here.
Go ahead, and I'm taking Rome Odunze at the 107.
I did pick Rome. I didn't think he was going to pick Rome because I think what'd you tell me yesterday, Mike? He's Alshon Jeffrey?
No, what I said was, why draft Rome Odunze when you could draft Brennan Rice? Because I see a lot of similarities in their game. And, hey, if you like them, draft both. Like I said, I see some similarities. And right now, Brennan Rice is a great value, but I'm sure he'll get drafted at some point. We'll talk about him. Rome Odunze is going to be a really good contributor, I think, in the NFL, potentially from day one. I do have some questions about his ability to purely separate. However, he makes up for it for physicality and being really good in traffic, great at the catch point, great high pointing as well. I do think he's going to be a fantastic NFL wide receiver. And, I always say sometimes better for the NFL and fantasy. I think he's going to translate to both.
Mike's not as much of a hater as maybe I thought he was.
No, I still like him. It's just, if I could.
Just really likes Brendan Rice, too.
I really likes to hate on him, though, without actually hating on him.
Wrapping up this first round, we got Brian Thomas at 108, Bo Nix at 109, Troy Franklin 110, Jonathan Brooks at 111, and Xavier Worthy making his way into the back end of the first. I saw this last night in the mock draft I did with the community as well. If you want to draft with us every single day, multiple drafts a day, get in the Discord, hop in there, draft away. Now I'm at the 201. There we go. I nailed it this time. And I feel like you're in such a big tier at this point. Like, this tier maybe starts at like the 111, maybe the 110, even depending on how the quarterbacks shake out, where I'd really love to trade back, consider trading this pick out for a 25 first even. But I'm going to continue to take, if I can find him, my running back 2 in this class at this point in Bucky Irving. Was definitely considering Braylon Allen at that pick as well, but I can't pass on Bucky Irving with what I believe as a supreme runner and I believe a supreme pass catcher that can, continue to ascend at the next level in terms of, usage, will find a role in an offense, if not as a, I don't think he's a workhorse in a backfield, but I think he could be the workhorse in terms of getting 60 to 70% of the work, spell him with somebody else, let him stay efficient because that's what he's good at. He's a great runner between the tackles, outside, and getting the ball in his hand through the air. Then we see that respect. This is why I drafted Bucky Irving, because I trusted Caleb one of our new Discord moderators, to make good on Braylon Allen and take him at the 2-2. So Nate couldn't even do it to make good on his rankings. Nate, what do you think of that 2-3 here?
I guess I was going after Ladd McConkey here, but we have JJ McCarthy falling all the way to the 203, and I just took him in the last mock at the 108, and I expect him at this point to have top 15, top 20 draft capital. So there's honestly no way that I can pass on JJ McCarthy at the 203, even though I picked up a quarterback already. But then again, we just talked about if you don't have 3 really good quarterbacks, then you probably have a quarterback issue at least, or you could at least use another one. So if I pick up Drake May, JJ McCarthy, slim chance that at least one of them doesn't work out. Like I said, the value there, I'm a value drafter to a fault. I already have a quarterback, but give me JJ McCarthy. I can, at worst, he's a starting quarterback and I can trade him for something better than 203.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and I think too, there's some caveats here because I personally don't necessarily buy into that yet, with JJ McCarthy, but that's one of the caveats of drafting beforehand is especially a quarterback, because you're going to see a lot of variance with, if JJ's a day one pick, top 15, like you said, 100% belongs in that 108 to 110 range. And same with Bo Nix. But if he doesn't, what are you thinking then? Like, even if it's early second, what do you think? Early to mid second of
he's a first
rookie
round
draft?
If he's a first round pick, but not like a top 20, is that what you're saying?
I'm saying if he doesn't even crack the first round.
If he doesn't crack the first round, any of these quarterbacks who are second round picks, for me, this is where I'd start looking at them.
Okay.
If I needed a quarterback. But anyone who's a day 2 pick, I'm probably looking at in the second round, not in the first round. Probably about the 203, 204 is where I start considering it, but probably more so even the mid second.
Yeah. And I think that's just one of the caveats to drafting early. Ladd McConkey at 2.5. I like that pick. I would not hate putting him over Bucky Irving for me at this point. I think they're in the same tier for me in my rankings. So I'm taking the running back while I can. I know I'm not going to get one that I feel awesome about at 3-1, I don't think. So that's, again, knowing the draft board that much more. Catching up on picks, Michael Penix, Ladd McConkey, Trey Benson at 2.6 as opposed to the 112 in the previous mock draft. Mike, you're up at the 207 with less of an easy decision, in my opinion. Who do you got here, 207?
Well, the 2 guys that I was hoping would fall to me got picked right before me. My queue was set up as Ladd McConkey and then Trey Benson. I was like, I'll get one of these 2 guys. Guess what? I did not. In reality, what I would do is I would trade back a few spots and take Benson. Sure. However, I do still like Jatavian Sanders, and I think you can get Benson a little bit later, so I'm not going to just try to force anything. But JT Sanders, why cover this guy? 6'4", I think, and however heavy he is, they're just like, we don't need to cover him. It's always wide open. I think he can be used on screens pretty good too. He'll be an effective tight end at the next level. I'm excited.
I really like JT Sanders, and I think in any other draft class that doesn't include a Brock Bowers or a really top, easy, elite tight end like that, I think JT Sanders would be in competition for the tight end 1.
Don't have to do much catching up on the draft, but Marshawn Lloyd comes off at the 208, so no chance for Nate getting him at 3-3, but I think you were pretty much, willing and ready to say
I'm aware if this was a rookie draft, not with our patrons, I might be able to pick him up at the 303, but
sure.
Where, the people in the Discord, they know.
It helps that we have that Dynasty Rewind ADP kicking around too, seeing where a lot of these picks are going off. And whether he was auto-drafted or not, Keon Coleman at 209, I think is a pretty good spot for him. And this is not, any hate when we list concerns. That's just listing concerns and why we think maybe he should be lower than he's being drafted or propped it up to be. And I think most communities, most people have caught on to, hey, Keon Coleman is a little bit raw, does have a lot of upside, but we've seen that over the last couple of years where rawness just does not automatically translate to the next level. And all the upside in the world doesn't translate to the next level if you can't work out the small kinks. And by small kinks, it's, elite route running, concentrated catching of the ball, which I think Keon Coleman has some great hands, but are they consistent? It's not hate, just questions. And we see Adonai Mitchell at 210, Ray Davis at 211, which is one of the earliest times I've seen him drafted. But hey, it is what it is. We're wrapping up the second round here and curious to see what's waiting for me at the 3-1. I got to start thinking about my pick. I actually know my pick if I don't get sniped here, but we'll see what happens. And it's going to be Jalen Polk if he makes it to me. So we might see a live snipe reaction. Who knows? But we'll have to see. Let's see what happens. He did not go. Blake Corum goes off the board before me. I get to take Jalen Polk, who I think once we get into, rookie drafts, I think it's a pipe dream to see him at 301. But I said the same thing about seeing, guys like Jaden Reed and Josh Downs at 301 last year, and he made it there in a handful of drafts. So
there's just a lot of players, Bob. They're going to be pushed down.
Yeah, and that's beautiful. There's some guys that, one thing we talk about, Nate, you brought up, and I love to tout as much as I can, not always knowing who to draft, but who not to draft. I think Nate might have just got sniped there a little bit. But, I think there's going to be a lot of what you've also referenced as draft fodder along the way of guys that, maybe get overdrafted because guys want to go get their guys as opposed to soaking up proper value or trying to trade down. Taking Jalen Polk, love the hands, spectacular catch, will fight a dude if he has to. Great, run blocker, very, very physical, getting involved, and a good route runner at that. I do kind of see him in that similar ilk of a Jaden Reed or a Josh Downs. Not necessarily the same players, but in that like archetype of where they can be in Dynasty Fantasy Football wide receiver 2-3 range, where they can be great flex plays, great fill-in wide receiver 3s or 2s as needed. So we see Roman Wilson, we see Nate, you go Xavier Legette here.
I do.
Anything to add to what we discussed with Xavier Legette already, the big concerns over the fifth-year breakout? Anything you want to add on to Mike's discussion from prior?
Yeah, the fifth-year breakout obviously is a question mark, but I just love watching his tape from this past year. He was such a good wide receiver this year. Now, we have that question mark. Is it just because he's bigger and faster and older than everyone else in the field, or is it because he's really just that good at this point? We're going to find out. And that's why at this point, I feel okay with it in the third round. I wouldn't be taking Xavier Legette in the second, most likely. But I think he has a ton of upside. If Legette is a top 5 wide receiver from this draft class 2 years from now, I would not be surprised. But with the question marks around him, I feel much more comfortable taking a shot on him in the third round.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. We see Audric estimate at 3-4. Mike, let's talk about who you're probably going to get sniped on here. That's probably it. That was a good call by me. Brendan Rice and Malachi Corley going off back-to-back before Mike. I can't imagine that those were not in your queue. What do you think?
That's okay. You'll have to forgive me. My screen blacked out, so I had to switch over to my phone, but that's okay.
All-terrain drafting.
That's right. Hey, whatever it takes, guys. That's okay. Also, shout out to Jay Maiden, who I found out in the chat, the chat that we're having on the mock here. He lives 15 minutes away from me. So
very cool.
Yeah, small world, right? That's awesome. But this is okay, guys. Everything's fine. Death, taxes, and Michael Bauer drafting multiple tight ends in a rookie draft. And look, Ben Sinnott, I got my guys. I still like JT Sanders. And even though I said Ben Sinnott is my tight end too, a.k.a. the next Sam Laporta, I'm not saying that he is. I'm not saying that he's not. The parallels that I'm making here is he is not the tight end one in his class. However, when he gets on the NFL field and he has a good landing spot and people could actually see what his skill set is, I think he could have a value-esque ascension like Sam Laporta did last year. Not saying that he'll go from tight end 48 to tight end 1 or whatever, but I do think that people are going to catch on relatively quickly. Hey, this guy is it. He's the real deal. We like him. You should too. He does everything so well.
I do want to touch on a point you were kind of glancing over with. You have Benson ahead of JT Sanders, and This is knowing the draft board, knowing consensus rankings versus your own, and that's why having your own rankings you trust. We have rankings of our own, patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind, but having your own thoughts and then not necessarily saying this is how I'm going to draft using those rankings, but how can you play with your own rankings compared to the consensus draft board that most people are going to be working off of to get excellent value on players? And I don't know that this exactly translates later, but just right now, like you touched on with Jatavion Sanders, having him slightly behind Ben Sinnott in your grading, being able to take him significantly later, even a little bit later, if you were to trade back up, whatever the case is, it's just awesome practice and a great way to use rankings in your drafts.
One thing I will say, if this was a real draft and I did, I was able to move around, obviously we can't do that in this exercise. And let's say I didn't really want JT Sanders for whatever reason. wasn't in a JT Sanders mood that draft day. I would probably trade back from the 2.7 to about the 2.11, 2.12 and take Ben Sinnott there and try to pick up some extra draft capital. Or you know what? Make the move back and like, hey, you got the 2.12 or 3.1 instead of another draft pick. You got Jalen Hyatt chilling on your bench, who's a buy low player for me. Maybe pick up a guy like that. Pick up some maligned buy low players. Those guys that people don't really want to trade away, but when they want to move around the draft board, that's when I look to make moves for players like that.
Post-hype sleepers.
Yeah, exactly. So.
Sure. Yeah, love it. So I went Dolan Holker, completing the rainbow for the second draft in a row, getting one of every player. Unintentional. I just believe that Dolan Holker should be in drafts at this point, and I think part of the reason why he's not, really hard to find any tape on Colorado State. So not a lot of people can go clip film of him and be like, wow, look at how good he is at all this stuff. But just purely looking at the raw metrics that he puts together, extremely efficient, though limited through his first several seasons until he transferred to Colorado State and absolutely popped the F off. But the thing is, those efficiency metrics were good every single year in limited work. Had a significant injury, I believe, in year 1 or year 2, but limited role the previous year. Then that injury, then he took 2 years off, came back, limited role again, playing for BYU. It happens. They do mission trips, they take breaks, whatever it is. But Dolan Holker, extremely efficient, and that's something you want to see at the next level for a tight end, a guy who can be a reliable catcher of the ball, extremely efficient with the ball in his hands, like we've discussed with Ben Sinnott. This dude is very likely, in my opinion, to be a weapon for an NFL offense. I don't think he's here at 4-1 when we get to draft day, when you get to rookie draft day. But I'm happy taking him here, especially if, once film gets out there on the guy, then you have something to look forward to. But then we see Will Shipley, Nate, you go Ricky Pearsall. Talk about him.
Yeah, another guy we talked about has done so well at the Senior Bowl and then has had the hype since then. He's another guy that since the Senior Bowl has been popping up as a day 2 lock. We weren't talking about Ricky Pearsall as a day 2 player at all before the Senior Bowl. And it's not just us. No one was talking about Ricky Pearsall as a day 2 player before the Senior Bowl, including, people who do this full time. And then he really opened up some eyes. A lot of people went back. We watched the film. And Ricky Pearsall, he gets open. And in today's NFL, teams want players who get open. That is what we've seen succeed over the last couple of years. I was listening to the NFL Draft Stock Exchange from PFF last night. They were talking about Ricky Pearsall and some of these other guys that are moving up draft boards over the last month or so. And a lot of it is because of the success that Amon-Ra St. Brown has had as a later pick at wide receiver. But, maybe he's not the most athletic guy out there. He's not the biggest guy out there. He's not the strongest guy out there. But Amon-Ra St. Brown knows how to get open. And because of his ability to get open, he has become a weapon at the next level and a stud. And now all these other teams, we always talk about it's a copycat league. Teams are always trying to find the next what. It's the next Puka Nacua this offseason. It's the next Amon-Ra St. Brown this offseason. Ricky Pearsall, he's one of those guys that knows how to get open. They're going to put him in that category of, hey, can I develop this guy and make him into a weapon for my team? At the 4 or 3 for a second round, third round wide receiver who a team's going to, try to possibly build around. I think that's a great pickup at this point. I think he should not coming out. He should not be coming out of the 3rd round.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you there. Catching up to Mike's pick, we got Cade Stover, Jamari Thrash, Jalen McMillan, and the non-consensual Dylan Johnson pick.
Dylan Johnson, baby.
And then after that, we see Frank Gore. And wrapping out this draft, we'll see what comes off the board. But, boys, what are some players that you'd be looking to draft, still want to pick up if you had picks in this range? Or what are you trying to do with any picks you may have in this range? Anybody who you think should absolutely be coming off the board sooner rather than later?
Well, I think if this was a real draft and the draft boards were set, Luke McCaffrey would be a guy that we'd be thinking about. Jace McClellan, Nate touched on him last draft. I agree with everything he said. There's Jawar Jordan from Louisville. I watched some film on. I like him a little bit too. There's no more quarterbacks I want at this point. Maybe Michael Pratt.
Michael Pratt, I think, should be coming off the board. He should be drafted within the first 4 rounds. I understand the Spencer Rattler hype has really built, and I've started coming around the Rattler myself. It really does seem like he's matured since the QB1 days when he was 17 years old, but who wasn't immature when they were 17 years old, right? So Rattler's definitely come around, but Michael Pratt definitely deserves to be right up there with him. Michael Pratt is a good quarterback. I expect him to be a day 2 quarterback. Someone else Mike, who I think you need to check into, is Isaiah Davis out of South Dakota State.
He's on my list.
There you go. Yeah.
Weekend,
He's pretty impressive film with his cuts and his vision. It's going to be interesting seeing what kind of draft capital he gets out of South Dakota State. I don't know if he's going to be drafted. Might be an undrafted free agent, but he probably would be a priority undrafted free agent at that point. So someone I would start looking at, Isaiah Davis in the late 4th, early 5th, depending on what the NFL draft looks like for him.
There's another guy too. The NFL community is really a buzz about him. The Senior Bowl guys liked him a lot. That's Theo Johnson, tight end from Penn State. Hasn't made really many mock drafts that we've done. And even though I'm a Penn State fan, I wasn't the biggest fan. But looking back on it a little bit more, I do like Theo Johnson better than Brenton Strange, who was a 2nd round draft pick last year. But Theo Johnson in the 4th round, I think he could be definitely a good value pick. We've seen some of those lower value tight ends pan out. Maybe I'm not saying he's going to be tight end 1, tight end 2 even, but a guy that you could probably fill in, every once in a while. You need guys like that. You need fill-in guys. Flex plays, injury, bye week fill-ins. Those are important. Depth is really important. And the 3rd and 4th round of your rookie drafts, even 5th round, depending, that's a good time to get depth that you like.
Yeah. And there's actually a couple players in this draft, or there's actually a couple players that are missing from this draft because they're just not a sleeper yet. Like Jalen Wright, who we talked about, Cody Schrader. So there's going to be 3 or 4 more players that make it into the top 3 or 4 rounds that push some of these other guys that we've seen in the 4th round out.
Yeah, I love Jalen Wright. I want to get him everywhere. I think he's going to be shaping up with this running back class. And I it sucks that we didn't get to see him at the Senior Bowl because of dealing with a cleanup to an injury he had or whatever. Is expected to blow up the combine in his own words. That's what he said. Expected to do well at the combine. I think he'll do well. I think he's a good athlete. I think he's a great player. Really excited to see what he does there. And I've already loved what I've seen on film. I think he's a great runner, some of the best contact balance in the class, some of the best yards after contact per carry in this class. Matthew Betts from the Footballers brand, he does a lot of their injury stuff, and he shared a bunch of the top players in this year's class that had the top yards per carry after contact. Neglected to leave Jalen Wright or put Jalen Wright on that list, and Jalen Wright actually had the most out of any running back in this class in this last season. So put some respect on the name. Don't forget about Jalen Wright when he gets in sleeper, and keep an eye out for that guy once we get into draft season for sure.
One other player that's not in sleeper yet that we'll probably be talking about in the first 4 rounds is Javon Baker out of UCF, former Alabama wide receiver, transferred there. Looked really good at the Senior Bowl. Analytically, comes out at near the top of this class in a lot of efficiency stats. He's really good getting down the field and winning at the contested catch point as an outside wide receiver. So definitely someone to keep an eye on and see how the pre-draft process continues to go for him. He did well at the Senior Bowl. And I expect him to test very well at the combine. So I think he's going to be a popular kind of deep sleeper in this draft.
That was one banger of a mock draft, and I hope that y'all enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like. Comment down below if you made it through the entire mock draft. Let us know what some of your favorite picks were, who is too high, who is too low, and let us know how you're feeling about this rookie draft class. And as I mentioned before, if you want to dive deeper with us into more discussions, head on over to patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind. Get in that Patreon Discord server, check out our rankings, bonus podcasts, the whole shebang, and even get in on a 7-day free trial to do so. And hey, if you made it this far and you don't want to miss any Dynasty content over the course of the offseason, whether it be trades, trade targets, incoming rookie class, strategy, whatever the case may be, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a thing. But with all that said, that is going to be it for us in this one. We will see you in the next one. But until then, I hope that y'all have a good one.